Jay Powell made a really interesting presentation at his press conference this morning, or afternoon Washington time, and it was a lot more. It was a lot more relatable than the Federal Reserve statement, which was pretty flat. And he moved very rapidly to address what most of the journalists in the room were thinking about is when is the next rate cut? And he pretty much first up said in the press conference that there'll be no rate cut in March, and ruled it out to the possibility of a rate cut starting in the middle of the year, and perhaps continued rate cuts as we go forward, as long as inflation continues to fall. But at the same time as the Fed is going to be cutting the Fed funds rate over the second half of the year, it's going to continue with quantitative tightening. And the quantitative tightening that the journalists thought that he was talking about was the overnight reverse purchase agreements. Now, those overnight reverse purchase agreements, which are lending to the banking system, peaked at 2.4 trillion about a year and a half ago, and now they've fallen all the way down to 600 million. So you would think, the way journalists are thinking about quantitative tightening, we're almost getting to the end of the process. But that's not the way Jay Powell is thinking about quantitative tightening. Quantitative tightening is running down the entire series of assets that the Federal Reserve has. And that's not just Treasury securities, it's also agency securities. And really importantly for the US economy, it's mortgage-backed securities. And mortgage-backed securities really important because it's, of course, home lending, which drives the major cycle of expansion and contraction in the US economy. And way back in the world before the pandemic, I went to a presentation in Philadelphia by Ben Bernanke, and I got the chance to ask him, how does quantitative tightening work? And he says, basically, it's a process of substitution. But if the more US debt and agency securities are held by the banks as part of their reserves, the less that they can hold corporate debt. And the less corporate debt they hold, the less is the flow of investment, which generates employment in the US economy. So the continuation of quantitative tightening, now to talk about the numbers, the total amount of that Treasury debt and asset-backed securities and mortgage-backed securities that the Federal Reserve held was around about $9 trillion, and this is now fallen to $7.6 trillion, which you would think would be a long way. But for the level of all of these assets that the Fed is holding to get down to the level where the Fed started back before the pandemic, it would have to fall at least another 3.6 trillion. So the Fed needs to will continue its sales of assets and sell a further 3.6 trillion in the banking system. And over the period, if that would happen, so it would take 2 or 3 years for that to occur, that crowds out investment into business investment in the US economy, and therefore that generates a sustained tightening. Having said that, at the end of last year, I started talking about the increased importance of the corporate debt market in influencing what was happening in stock markets. The BAA spread that we talk about, which is the difference between investment grade debt and sovereign debt, is down to 1.6%, which is close to the lowest that it was in 2007 during the liquidity boom of that time. So it's suggesting that there's a lot of liquidity, corporate liquidity, in the market, which has been holding up both the US and the Australian equities market. So yes, the Fed is going to be cutting rates this year, but it's also going to continue quantitative tightening. And the effect of that quantitative tightening may be much larger than the market believes. Currently, I have fair value for the S&P 500 in terms of my model of 4,300 points. So we started yesterday about one standard error too high.